The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character.
My name is Amelia, and I'm 31 years old. Last week, I was at my cousin's wedding rehearsal dinner. My aunt stood up in front of 80 people and announced to everyone that I wasn't actually her daughter. She had a big smile on her face while she told the guests she was paying for the $140,000 wedding. The truth was, she was using the money I had been secretly giving them for 10 years. Everyone in that room turned their heads to stare at me. I could sense their pity, hear their quiet murmurs, and feel the weight of everyone's eyes pressing down on my chest. But then I just smiled back at them. I knew something that they didn't. Have you ever felt like you were invisible in your own family? Tell me your story in the comments. Write a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I really want to know who is part of our community. The air on that fancy yacht in Nantucket was thick. You could smell the expensive flowers and the salt from the ocean spray. My aunt was standing at the head of a long mahogany table. Her silk dress was shiny under the crystal lights, looking like oil on top of water. She looked like the perfect example of someone with old money as she raised her glass to the 80 guests. These people were at the very top of the island's social circle. I just sat there. I'm a 31-year-old lawyer who handles big court cases, and I had spent 10 years being the secret person keeping this family afloat. I watched her lips curl into a mean, practiced smile when she called me a parasite and an outsider in front of the whole crowd. I didn't feel my heart break into pieces. Instead, it felt like it turned into a solid rock. My anger wasn't loud this time. It was cold and logical. I set my glass down on the white cloth. The sound of the glass hitting the wood was the only noise I could hear in my head. As people started whispering, I didn't start crying. I didn't ask her why she was doing this. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of making a scene. Instead, I stood up very calmly. It seemed to freak out my uncle, who was sitting right next to my aunt. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. I walked out onto the deck. The wind from the Atlantic was freezing and sharp, and it felt honest compared to all the fake stuff happening inside the cabin. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I moved with the same precision I use when I'm filing a motion in court. I opened my banking app. It was exactly 11:55 at night. I looked at the Family Trust line on my screen. That was the black hole that had swallowed $4,500 of my paycheck every single month for 10 years. I tapped Cancel Recurring Transfer. Then I tapped Confirm. I didn't feel bad about it. It felt like I was finally checking the books on a really bad investment. For a decade, I had been the silent person funding their version of a family. I was paying the bills for a lifestyle that they hadn't earned themselves. Now I realized it was just like a subscription service, and the free trial was officially over. I opened the group chat for our family. My aunt, my uncle, and my cousin were all in there. My cousin was the princess whose $140,000 wedding was currently being paid for by my hard work and all my overtime hours. I typed out 5 words. The kindness subscription has expired. I hit the send button and watched the little gray bubbles appear. I didn't wait for them to turn blue. I just blocked all of them. Inside, I could hear the faint sound of the band playing a waltz. They were still in there, celebrating a future that they thought I was going to pay for. I leaned against the railing and looked out at the dark horizon of Nantucket. This wasn't a mental breakdown. It was a balance sheet. My kindness was a luxury that they had spent too much of. Tonight, I was declaring emotional bankruptcy on their behalf. I looked at my watch. It was 12:03 in the morning. In just 6 minutes, I had ended 10 years of being their servant. I looked back through the glass doors of the yacht. I could see my aunt's face through the window. She was looking down at her phone. I saw the exact moment her face went from looking like a winner to turning totally white. All that old money calmness just disappeared. I didn't wait for her to come outside and start begging. I didn't wait for her to try and lie to me again. I walked to the back of the boat, called a water taxi, and got ready to step onto a different shore. It was a place where I didn't have to pay for the right to exist. I sat in the rear of that small water taxi. The low hum of the motor made the floorboards shake under my feet. I let that number, $540,000, really sink into my head. It wasn't just a digital figure on a screen anymore. It was 10 years of my life turned into cold, hard cash. Over the last decade, I had sent exactly $540,000 into that family trust. That is more than a fancy condo in downtown Chicago would cost. Most people don't even make that much in their entire life. But to my aunt and uncle, it was just the rent I had to pay so they would put up with me. 10 years ago, I was only 21. I was standing in the pouring rain at the funeral for my parents. I was holding a wet tissue and felt like the ground was disappearing under me. My mom and dad were gone. My aunt pulled me aside that night. She whispered to me in a way that felt like she was being helpful, but she was really just manipulating me. She told me my parents had left behind a massive pile of embarrassing debt. She said the family money was all gone. She claimed she and my uncle were risking their own money just to keep my parents' names out of bankruptcy court. Back then, I believed every word she said. I was sad, lonely, and I just wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere. When she told me I had to help pay those debts for the sake of the family, I didn't doubt her. I actually thanked her. I thanked her for the chance to work myself to death to pay back a debt that, as I would later find out, never even existed. That was how my life as their secret ATM started. I moved to Chicago and got a job as a junior lawyer at a big firm. Then the cycle began. I lived in a high-rise studio in the city. It was a glass box in the sky. It was pricey and modern, but it felt totally empty. It was a place for a successful attorney to live, but it never felt like a real home. I wore expensive suits to look tough in court, but my apartment was a void. There were no pictures on the walls and no rugs on the hard floors. There was just a desk piled with legal papers and an espresso machine. Sometimes at night, I would stare at the white ceiling of my expensive prison and wonder what I did wrong. Why was I always making sacrifices while my cousin's life was just one big party? My cousin is 4 years younger than me. She was the favorite kid who never had to learn what $1 was worth because she was always spending mine. While I worked 80 hours a week to become a partner, she was posting photos from vacations in Italy and shopping trips on Fifth Avenue. I remember one specific post from 3 years ago. She was holding a designer bag that cost $3,500. That was the exact same amount of money my aunt had begged me for that month to pay an emergency medical bill. The caption on her photo said, "Blessed to have parents who spoil me." I looked at that picture in my dark, cold apartment. For a second, I felt like I was choking, but I didn't say anything. I kept being useful. A therapist would probably say I was just trying to survive. I made these chains for myself. When you grow up in a toxic place, you learn that being needed is the only way to stay safe. I wasn't buying their love. I was just buying time so they wouldn't reject me. I lived in a house made of cards. It was a prison with no bars, and I built the walls out of my own guilt. The ceiling stayed up because my aunt always reminded me how lucky I was that they didn't kick me out on the street. I used to think that being needed meant I was wanted. I thought if I gave enough money and acted as their safety net, they would finally love me like a real daughter. I was wrong. To them, my value was just about how useful I was. I wasn't a niece. I was just a monthly paycheck. The difference between our lives was cruel. While I was checking if I could afford a new coat for the winter, they used my cash to put new granite counters in their house in Nantucket. While I skipped the dentist to save a few bucks, my cousin was getting a $140,000 wedding. I looked at my hands in the dim light of the boat. They weren't shaking. For 10 years, I had been the invisible base for their social status. I had funded their lie of being rich. But tonight on that yacht, that base finally broke. My aunt's smile was the final straw. It was the sharp edge that cut my chains. She stood there in a dress that cost more than 3 of my monthly payments and called me an outsider. She used my own hard work as a weapon to embarrass me. She thought I was still that sad 21-year-old girl who would do anything to be loved. She didn't realize she was messing with a lawyer who spends all day taking down people way more powerful than a mean aunt on a borrowed boat. As the boat got closer to the dock, I realized my silence wasn't a good thing. It was my cage. Tonight, I didn't just leave a party. I left the role they gave me. I wasn't their cash cow anymore. I wasn't their problem. I was the one who had all the proof of their lies for 10 years. The air was freezing now, but I didn't zip up my coat. I wanted to feel the cold. I wanted it to burn away the last 10 years of doing what I was told. My kindness was a resource they had drained until there was nothing left. I was done being the victim. I was ready to be the person who checks the books, and the audit of the family was just getting started. The morning sun over the water didn't feel warm. It just made everything look too clear. I sat on my hotel balcony and watched the fog move off the ocean while my phone kept vibrating on the glass table. My aunt called 52 times. My uncle called 17 times. I had dozens of texts that started out sounding confused and ended with them being totally furious. I didn't pick up once. I just went back to my laptop. My anger wasn't loud. It was like I was just doing math. I watched my aunt throw the first punch. She posted a black and white photo on Instagram of her and my cousin looking like their world had ended. The caption was a total lie. It said, "It breaks my heart that some people care more about money than family. My daughter's big day is being ruined by greed. Please pray for us during this hard time." I stared at the screen and felt a cold smile on my face. She wasn't upset about what she did. She was just shocked that I stopped paying her bills. In the comments, the rich people from Nantucket were already talking. "I'm so sorry," one person wrote. "Some people forget who raised them," said another. I could almost smell their panic through the computer screen. It was a stronger smell than the salt in the air. My aunt knew the people she hired for the $140,000 wedding wanted their final checks by the end of the week. Without my $4,500 monthly payment, her fake, old money, life was about to hit a brick wall. I grabbed my phone, but not to call her. I called the family's money guy, Robert. His voice sounded really stressed when he picked up. "Amelia, your aunt is saying there's a technical glitch with your automatic payments," Robert said. "She's demanding that I manually push the wedding money through the system." "That isn't going to happen, Robert," I told him. My voice was flat and steady. "I'm turning this family fight into a professional audit. I've already talked to an accounting firm in Chicago. I want a line-by-line list of every single cent I sent to that trust over the last 10 years. "Amelia, she's your family," Robert started to say. "No, Robert," I cut him off. "She's a client who spent too much money. My kindness was a luxury. She used it for 10 years, and now I'm calling in the debt." I hung up and wrote a formal notice. I didn't sound like a hurt niece. I sounded like a lawyer. I sent one email to my aunt and copied the senior partner at my firm. The message was short. "You have 72 hours to give me a certified record of the $540,000 I put into the Horizon Trust. If you don't show me how this money paid off my parents' debt, I am filing a lawsuit for fraud and breach of duty." I hit send. Inside my laptop, the screen was glowing with facts and numbers. This wasn't a breakdown. It was an audit of her soul, and I knew I was going to find a lot of lies. The truth didn't come out with a loud bang. It arrived in a dry, 50-page PDF from a group of accountants. I sat in my office in Chicago. The city outside was blurry because of the rain on my window. I watched 10 years of my life change from a sacrifice into a crime. I had spent 10 years paying for a ghost. My aunt told me my parents died with a mountain of debt. She used that to make me a slave for her money. But the bank records and the legal papers from 10 years ago told a different story. It was a story about a robbery. The accountant marked one specific payout from 2 weeks after the funeral. It was a life insurance policy for $1,200,000. The person who was supposed to get that money was me. I stared at the digital scan of the claim form. At the bottom, there was a signature that looked like mine, but the way the letters leaned was wrong. The pressure on the pen was too heavy. It was a fake. My aunt and uncle didn't just take my paychecks, they stole my past. They took $1,200,000 that was meant for my school and my future. Then they had the guts to tell me I owed them for a place to live. Every dollar I sent them since I was 21 was pure profit for them. The family trust wasn't a safety net. It was a place to hide the money they stole from me. They used my $1 million to buy their house in Nantucket and pay for my cousin's fancy schools. Then they used my $4,500 monthly payments to keep that lifestyle going. While they sat on my money, I rubbed my eyes. I didn't feel bad. I just saw everything clearly now. This wasn't just a family fight anymore. It was a crime scene. I realized that for 10 years, I wasn't just an unloved niece. I was the victim of a long scam. They didn't just ignore me. They erased who I was just to keep the money coming. I picked up the phone and called the boss at my law firm. "I need to file a criminal report," I said. My voice was as cold as a bank statement. "We are talking about forgery, stealing an identity, and grand larceny." I looked at the photo of my parents on my desk. For 10 years, I thought I was paying for their mistakes. Now, I knew I was the one who was going to make my aunt and uncle pay for theirs. The trap they used on me when I was 21 was finally turning back on them. It was calm, and it was deadly. The rhythmic click of my aunt's designer heels on the marble floor of the firm echoed like a death march. She didn't wait for my assistant to say she was there. She just burst into my office. Her face was a mess of smeared mascara and pure panic. The cocky attitude she had on the boat in Nantucket was totally gone. She looked like a trapped animal now. "Amelia, you have to stop this," she gasped. She was shaking and grabbing the edge of my big desk. "The Miller family, the groom's parents, they heard about the audit. They are threatening to cancel the whole wedding unless we prove the money is real." I didn't stand up. I didn't even look away from my computer screen for the first 30 seconds. I let the silence sit there until she started to tremble. When I finally turned my chair to look at her, I didn't see an aunt. I saw a defendant in a criminal case. "The money isn't real, and we both know that now," I said. My voice was as steady as a judge's gavel. She tried to act like she still had power. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "We raised you. We gave you a home when you had nothing. You owe my daughter her fairy tale wedding." I slid a single folder across the desk toward her. Inside was the scan of that life insurance paper with the fake signature. "You didn't give me a home," I told her. "You used $1.2 million of my stolen money to buy yourself a life you couldn't afford." I watched her last bit of old money, pride, just evaporate. She collapsed into the chair and started breathing in short, ragged bursts. I realized then that her whole social life was just a lie she had rented using my hard work and my parents' money. Without my $4,500 a month and that stolen million, she was just a common thief in a silk dress. "My daughter is innocent," she whispered. Her eyes were red and she was begging. "Don't ruin her life because of a mistake we made years ago." "A mistake is a typo," I replied. I leaned forward until I could see the sweat on her face. "Forging my name to steal over $1 million and then lying to me for 10 years to keep me paying your bills is a criminal business. You're done." I stood up and fixed my blazer. The power had completely shifted. "The Miller family is right to be worried," I said. "A family built on fraud isn't high class. It's a liability." "What do you want?" she sobbed. She looked smaller than I ever thought possible. "I've already given my statement to the district attorney," I said. My tone was cold and final. "Here is the end of it. The house in Nantucket is being seized because it was bought with stolen money. You have 48 hours to get out." I walked to the door and held it open for her. "Goodbye. Tell your daughter I hope she finds a dress that doesn't cost someone else's soul." I didn't watch her walk away. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at the results of the audit. It was the end of a 10-year debt. The wedding of the decade didn't happen. It just ended in nothing. Within a day of my aunt leaving my office, the Miller family put out a formal statement. They didn't just cancel the party. They cut my aunt's family out of their lives completely. My cousin was left with a designer dress that was now just a white flag of surrender. My aunt and uncle didn't even try to fight the charges. The audit was so detailed that they had no way out. They pleaded guilty to forgery and grand larceny so they wouldn't have to spend a decade in prison. The judge was fast. They were ordered to pay back everything: the $1.2 million from the insurance and the $540,000 I had paid them while they were lying to me. The Nantucket house was the first thing they lost. I watched the auction online from my new office. I saw that place where they called me an outsider get sold for even more than the stolen money. My aunt and uncle moved into a small, cheap apartment on the mainland. They live on a tiny pension that barely covers their lawyers. My cousin, the spoiled girl, had to get a real job for the first time. She finally learned that her luxury life was a debt she never actually paid for. I didn't keep that $1,740,000 just because I wanted to be wealthy. I kept just enough to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a new home for me and Nathan. The rest of the money, exactly $1,400,000, went straight into a foundation I started. I called it the Horizon Trust. It is a safety net that actually does its job and helps people. We provide legal support and forensic accounting for young people whose families treat them like a source of cash instead of human beings. I want to make sure that no one else has to stay invisible for a decade just because they are afraid of being rejected. Last night, Nathan and I sat on the balcony of our new place and looked at the Chicago skyline. He didn't ask me who I was living for anymore. He knew I was living for myself now. The noise in my head, the lies from my aunt, and the need to be useful is finally gone. It's been replaced by a silence that feels like peace. I used to think I had to pay for my spot at the family table every month, like a subscription to a love that wasn't even real. But being a silent investor for 10 years taught me a big lesson. Your place in a family should never come with a payment plan. Your value isn't measured by how much of yourself you burn to keep other people warm. For 10 years, I lived in a prison I built out of my own silence. I was the black sheep who tried too hard to be a real daughter, only to realize I had the keys to the cage the whole time. I didn't just stop talking, I broke the whole cycle. To anyone listening who feels invisible or who gives until they are empty, hear me. Setting boundaries isn't a betrayal. It is how you survive. Don't let your silence become the cage that keeps you small. It will hurt to walk away from people you love. But I promise you, staying in that silence will hurt way more. The family learned they can't use my kindness anymore. And I learned that the best thing I ever spent money on was finally choosing myself. If this story helped you find the strength to set your own rules, please share it. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next story about justice. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.